Quick disclaimer before the rest of this video starts. This video is going to be more about Wear OS as a whole, but to get a bit of perspective, we're going to start out with a quick overview of the watch that I use. Okay, so this thing is insane. Video on it coming soonish. So I just spent about 45 minutes riding around campus using the watch just for music control, like using it actively every few minutes. And I can't even begin to understand how to comprehend this battery graph. A lot of the drain looks like it happened while it was on its charger, which is weird. It's just a big gap. While it was on the charger, it should have been charging, but it wasn't. And then I picked it up, it lost a bunch, and I've been using it, it lost even more. And now it's gonna last for about less than 2 hours. Let's get back to the video. This is the LG Watch Style. It was sort of an entry-level watch released back in 2017, but definitely take entry-level with like a pretty big grain of salt because it released at $250. That was $50 more than the Galaxy Watch Active, about on par with the Galaxy Watch Active 2, and about $50 more than what you can currently get an Apple Watch Series 3 directly from Apple stores brand new for. So naturally, I definitely didn't buy this watch at its obscenely high MSRP, but let me tell you why it was barely even worth the $51 I paid for it on eBay. I've kind of a love-hate relationship with the build of the watch. It's one of the first smartwatches I've seen that doesn't look like a giant brick on your wrist, but at the same time it also looks super cheap. If you were just taking a first glance on it, I wouldn't blame you if you thought it was made completely of plastic. But surprisingly, the only plastic you'll actually find on this watch is on the bottom for wireless charging. The rest of the frame is actually surprisingly metal. Props to LG for making metal that looks so cheap that I mistake it for plastic all the time. Good job, LG. Screen is covered in what LG claims to be Gorilla Glass 3, but in a demo video from Android Authority, you can definitely see that it's pretty strong. Like Gorilla Glass 3, pretty good. But if you look at my watch, you'll see a pretty sizable scratch just from brushing it up against the table while I was walking. For reference, here's a cheap sub $20 knockoff Amazon watch. Not a scratch. So nowadays, when you're buying a smartphone, you don't really need to pay attention to the specs of the phone. Most of the time, any chip that's in any modern smartphone will be good enough. It's not something you really have to worry about anymore. However, that is definitely not the case for Wear OS right now. When you buy a Wear OS watch, you should probably definitely pay attention to the specs on it, because a lot of these mobile watch chips are really bad right now. This particular watch is rocking a Qualcomm Snapdragon Wear 2100 512 megabytes of RAM, 4 gigs of onboard storage, a 240 milliamp hour battery, 802.11n Wi-Fi, which surprisingly there's no AC, but I can't remember the last time I've even tried to connect to Wi-Fi on my watch, so don't really care. It's only got Bluetooth 4.2, no Bluetooth 5, but seeing as this watch came out in early 2017, that's pretty understandable. Now on paper, you might not learn too much from these specs, so let me tell you how they actually perform. Like hot garbage. Doing what seems like simple tasks on this watch end up being super drawn out. One thing that I've noticed to be notoriously slow is the keyboard. I've tried to reply to messages before on this watch, but you just shouldn't. It's a really bad experience. Speaking of experience, trying to do anything other than just look at your notifications on this thing is a bad experience. Because of how slow this thing's essentially just been something I look at notifications on. Every now and then, when it happens to get a notification, sometimes notifications just don't come through on the watch. And of course, I also use it as a watch, but only while indoors, because the screen is so dim that if you're outdoors or even in a bright room, you can't see the screen. That is, even if you are indoors and the screen is on, because most of the time, it's just dead anyways. So battery life on a watch is very important. We're currently used to our non-smart watches lasting for weeks, months, even years at a time, or even every 5 years you wind the little thing on the side and you're good. You never have to worry about charging your watch. So, if you're trying to sell me a smartwatch, it better at least get through a day, or it better not be an inconvenience to worry about charging this thing. I'd say a good spot to start at is to have it last a day, so that when I get home or I go to bed, I can take it off, lay it on its charger, and we're fine. That's not inconvenient. But what is inconvenient is when it dies after 3 hours or halfway through the day, because that's what happens most of the time. It doesn't even last a full day. So I have to think about taking this thing off and charging it midway through the day when I'm at school or at work. I can't just take my watch off and charge it while I'm out and about doing things. This watch definitely has a long way to go until it reaches that all-day battery. This one, by far, has the worst battery out of all of them. It's notoriously known to just have the worst battery. It's one of the drawbacks that comes with how thin it is, but that doesn't mean the rest of Wear OS watches are good. As far as battery goes, they're all still pretty bad. This one's just the worst. Another thing about this watch is it has this really interesting thing it does, where sometimes in the morning, when I pick it up off its charger, I can watch the battery go down to 65%. It's not fun. You can see it in some of these battery graphs, and even in some of these, you can actually see where I opened up the watch and tried to reply to a message. You can see a significant drop in the battery every time I try to do that. The days where I do manage to get almost a full day of battery usage are the ones where I don't touch the watch at all. If you were to say go on Reddit right now or any of the other smart Android Wear OS communities out there, there's a lot of tricks for extending your battery life, which just involve a lot of disabling things like auto brightness, lift to wake, touch to wake. You basically, to get any battery life on these, you just have to cut the functionality out. And at that point, it becomes not a smartwatch anymore. It's just a watch that dies really quickly. Despite what a lot of these people may say in these communities, it's not really a solution. Why would I buy something because it can do all these cool things, but then just be told to turn off all these cool things if I want to be able to use it throughout the day? Speaking of other Wear OS watches, there seems to be a good chunk of them that just have their own issues. Like mine has the notoriously bad battery life. Fossil watches apparently have a problem where their charging rings just start popping off. And Huawei watches have a bunch of software issues, but apparently Huawei and Huawei style is now just going to start making their own smartwatch software away from Wear OS. You do you, Huawei. I have heard good things about the Tag Heuer connected series of smartwatches. Those come with definitely a price tag, but if you're not in the 1%, there's also TicWatch makes some pretty good stuff. So I'm definitely not trying to write off all these watches. Like I said, there is definitely some legitimately good hardware in the Wear OS space. Much like Android as a platform, you get the choice of what hardware you want, and I think that's really cool. But the only bad thing is that they're all being held down by the Wear OS software. When I was writing the script for this video, I probably wrote Android Wear about 50 times, and then while recording over it again for this voiceover, I read the Wear OS that I switched it to and probably still said Android Wear another good 50 times. How many times have I said Android Wear? Oh no. Wear OS. Wear OS watch. And I've probably switched between the two a lot throughout this recording, so I'm sorry about that. I am talking about Wear OS because they changed it from Android Wear to Wear OS not too long ago. And I can't be the only one that's confused about this. Well, not confused, but in a bit of a mix-up. If you go into the Play Store right now, Google's own Play Store, and look for the app companion so that you can set up your smartwatch with your phone. The app in the Play Store is currently called Wear OS by Google Smartwatch, parentheses, was Android Wear. Yeah, you can go check. That's actually what it's called in the Play Store right now. It's actually just kind of standard Google at this point. They kind of have a bad habit of just spontaneously rebranding all of their products. It makes it really hard to keep older family members in track when something they use on their phone every day suddenly looks different, has a different name, and works differently, but it's still the same thing. Thank you for that, Google. Remember Google Home? Now it's Google Nest. Remember Google Now? Now it's Google Assistant. Remember Google Allo? Now it's a smart messaging protocol on your SMS app for sending RCN messages. Remember Google itself? Now it's called Alphabet.
And Alphabet now owns Google, and Google doesn't own Alphabet, and Google used to own some stuff, they sold it to Alphabet. Now Alphabet owns that stuff, Google doesn't. There are some subsidiaries and parts of Google that aren't Google anymore because they're now Alphabet, and it's just so, this all makes sense, right? Remember Google Graveyard? All the stuff that Google's killed? There's a bunch of them. Remember Google Glass? Remember Google Daydream? YouTube Gaming? Remember Google Plus? Oh.
I remember Google Plus. That sucked. You might be asking why I just brought all of that up. And that's because what happens to a lot of Google projects. Every day, Wear OS just kind of starts to feel like one of those niche Google projects that didn't really get very far, gets rebranded a few times, and then eventually just killed after a few years after getting neglected for a while. There's definitely some stuff going really right with Wear OS. I really like the idea of it. Smartwatches are cool. But the software is just way too clunky. We haven't gotten updates in a while. There's basically no third-party support. A lot of the community is waiting for Google to release some sort of Pixel Watch that'll magically fix all of Wear OS's problems, and we'll get a nice watch, and we'll all get a software update, and all of our watches will be great. Well, that would be really cool. It definitely doesn't look like it's happening.
Thanks so much for joining us here in New York City, and for those on the live stream for joining us around the world. Our mission is to bring a more helpful Google for you. It means creating products like these. So I'm excited to share an update with y'all.
Okay, so Google's yearly Made by Google hardware event just wrapped up. They released some new stuff like the Pixel 4, the Pixel Buds, their Chromebook thing, talked about Stadia for a bit. But as you guessed it, there was no mention of Wear OS or any smartwatches of any kind in the entire presentation. Trust me, I watched it. For perspective, they spent 24 minutes talking about the new Pixel 4, 11 minutes talking about a bunch of Nest stuff, 5 minutes talking about the Pixel Buds, 2 minutes talking about a $650 Chromebook, and the 25 minutes in between, they talked about the Stadia controller or something. This makes the future of Wear OS look pretty bleak. We haven't really heard anything about it in any of Google's recent hardware events or their software events or their developer events. The last thing we got was an update that added swipey tiles to the weather slide of the thing. It's really hard to think it, but it makes me think that Wear OS is pretty soon on the Google Graveyard chopping block. It makes all this even worse is that there are other people like Apple and Samsung that came seriously into the smartwatch game way later than Google did, but are already doing so much better. The Apple Watch has already become the best smartwatch out there. The only thing that was really lacking for me for a while was the always-on display, but just released the Series 5, which, as you guessed it, now has that always-on display. If the integration with Android was better, there's pretty much no doubt that I would be using an Apple Watch right now. Then even Samsung has started making some serious move in the smartwatch game too. Their Tizen OS used to be really bad, but now with the One UI updates on their phones, they've made One UI for their watches now. And it's actually getting really good. They started out with the Galaxy Watch, which was a great step in the right direction. And they've iterated on that with the Watch Active, and the Watch Active 2 is now a really good watch that you should go check out. It could actually start rivaling the Apple Watch now, which just leaves Google and Wear OS so much farther behind. It's kind of sad. Now, the point of this video isn't to just ridicule Google about another failed project. Despite all of its flaws, I still use my watch style almost every day, because I'm a nerd that thinks this stuff is really cool, and I'll always have like little gadgets on me. But the platform currently really isn't in a great state, and if you're not just a person that likes gadgets and cool stuff, I definitely wouldn't recommend buying an Android Wear watch. I really do hope the platform gets better. I love my watch. I'd love to see it get better. I'd love for there to be a Pixel watch that revolutionizes hardware, smartwatch design, and updates that come with that OTA that make not just the Pixel watch, but everybody's watch is better. And then Google can get up there with the leagues of Apple and Samsung, and then they have to make moves, so everything gets better. I would love that. So here's the hoping that something like that does happen. But for now, looks like my next smartwatch is going to be from Samsung.